beginning is a very delicate time. Know then that it is the year 10,191.
In the world of Game of Thrones, there are places we never see or visit directly, but the rumors and legends make them feel just as important to the story as Winterfell or Meereen. Through the indirect stories of Aeria Targaryen, Euron Greyjoy, and Garyon Lannister, we learn that the ruins of Old Valyria are teeming with dangerous fire magic and ancient dragon lore. Despite us readers never getting a first-hand look, we know so much about this place and the role it played in Ice and Fire history. Another example is Asshai by the Shadow. In 5 novels, 3 novellas, 2 lore books, and an HBO adaptation, we've never seen Asshai up close. We only get rumors and reports of questionable veracity. Whatever the maesters of the Citadel think they know about the Shadowlands pales in comparison to the first-hand knowledge of the 5 characters who have been to Asshai and interacted with a POV character. What can they tell us about the Shadow? First, let's gather all the intel we currently have. Asshai is a city in the Shadowlands, a mountainous region in the far southeast of Essos. The river Ash runs through a narrow valley called the Vale of Shadows. Its water appears black during the day, but glows phosphorescent green during the night. The river is polluted, its fish blind and deformed. At the heart of the Vale of Shadows lay the city of Stygia, called the Corpse City. People claim it's haunted, with demons and dragons and worse, prowling the ruins so that even the Shadowbinders fear the haunted city. Because of the water pollution, the Asshai people rely on trade for all their drinking water and their food. No animals can survive in Asshai. The poisonous Ash River kills them all. The city itself hardly makes sense. They say its walls are wide enough to contain Volantis, Karth, Old Town, and King's Landing combined. But Asshai's population is no greater than a middling market town. Its buildings are made of greasy black stone that drink sunlight, casting a dim shadow on the city. The people of Asshai do not gather in crowds. They travel alone, covering their faces with masks and veils, often riding in richly crafted palanquins. With no horses to pull them, the Asshai ride on the backs of slaves. We are told there are no children in Asshai. Perhaps it's just that Archmaester Marwyn and all the others who made expeditions to Asshai simply never saw any children. Maybe they're kept hidden from the ports, attending classes in secret black buildings deep within the city. Or maybe there truly are no children. Maybe they were the only children Asshai ever knew. They were born long ago and are now stuck in perpetual stasis. They never age and they never procreate, for they know that a child could not survive here. Or, even more sinister, the Asshai might use their babies as fuel for their magic. We're constantly told that magic comes at a great price in this world. When Daenerys brings life to her 3 stone dragon eggs, she did so in a blood sacrifice which killed Meereenese, who also implies that it was the death of Dany's son Rhaegar that paid for the life of Khal Drogo. Miri learned the spell that preserved Khal Drogo's life while she was in Asshai. Miri says, "I learned the way in Asshai, and paid dear for the lesson." What if the price for this spell is the life of a baby? Miri sacrificed her own child to learn the spell, and Dany sacrificed Rhaegar. To keep the magic in Asshai alive, maybe they use babies in their blood magic, and that's why there are no children in Asshai, a land where both children and morality come to die. They spend their time practicing sorcery forbidden in other parts of the world. In Asshai, all magic is allowed to be practiced freely. Shadowbinders, warlocks, alchemists, necromancers, shape-changers, all are welcome in the shadow, able to conduct their obscene rites and fornicate with demons if that is their desire. But we are reminded both in the lore book and by George R.R. Martin himself that nearly everything the rest of the world knows about Asshai is unreliable. It might all be nothing more than grim fables. The two fake history books, The World of Ice and Fire and Fire and Blood, contradict each other on whether or not two famous travelers ever visited Asshai. In 2014, George, or perhaps his co-authors, wrote in one section that Lammis Longstrider did visit Asshai, where they asked him about the infamous gold of Casterly Rock. But later it says Lammis Longstrider never saw Asshai by the Shadow. Similarly, the section says that Corlys Velaryon never visited Asshai on any of his 9 famous voyages. But in 2018, Fire and Blood goes into detail about Corlys becoming the first Westerosi to ever reach Asshai, and how he might have seen Elissa Farman's ship, the Sunchaser, in the harbor there. This seems like an example of George Martin changing his mind. First, no Westerosi had ever reached the Shadowlands. Then, Lammis Longstrider and Corlys Velaryon, two of the most famous people in Westerosi history, both spent time in Asshai. The section closes by saying, "The world is vast and wondrous strange, and there are more things beneath the stars than even the Archmaesters of the Citadel can dream." George Martin says this:
Where does she get that information? She got that information from one of my fake history books. And who wrote the fake history book? A maester at the Citadel. Where is the Citadel? On the westernmost edge of the world. Where is Asshai? On the easternmost edge of the world.
He compares the maesters writing about Asshai to medieval monks writing about Vietnam. The maesters don't know the truth of Asshai, and neither do we. For that, we'll need to rely on the characters who have been there, and those who may go there. Daenerys' story seemed to be heading towards Asshai. Her dragon eggs came from the Shadowlands. After Khal Drogo died, Jorah suggested they go to Asshai and hire a ship back to Pentos. Quaithe told Daenerys that she will find truth in Asshai. In fact, Quaithe appears to Dany 4 times, telling her to pass beneath the shadow. Most recently, in her final chapter of Book 5, meaning that at the current point of the story, Asshai is still on Dany's mind. What could Daenerys find in Asshai? And does George Martin still plan for Dany to go east? Martin's writing style is spontaneous. He doesn't adhere to strict outlines, but rather to general destinations in his head. He plants a seed of a storyline and waits to see where his own mind takes it. Some of the bigger destinations he's already planning are things like King Bran, Hodor's hold the door moment, and Stannis burning Shireen. Other seeds he's let die out, like Tyrion's acrobatics from Book 1, or the switch from Ned Dane to Gerald Dane with the abandonment of the 5-year gap, or the scrapped meeting between Tyrion and the Shrouded Lord on the River Rhoyne. Or sometimes he'll plant a seed very suddenly and bring it to the forefront of the story, like the emergence of Doran Martell's secret plots in Book 4. Did George know about the Martell's schemes when he began the series? Probably not. Perhaps the biggest deviation from George Martin's original plan is the story of Daenerys. George first imagined A Song of Ice and Fire as a trilogy, as proven in this letter to his publisher and in this novella, Blood of the Dragon, which was released before the first book in 1996. George planned 3 novels and 3 major conflicts: the War of the Five Kings in Book 1, Dany's invasion of Westeros in Book 2, and The Long Night in Book 3. But as George kept writing, his story grew and grew. He invented the entire Slaver's Bay plotline for Daenerys, and decided that she must stay in Meereen to rule for a while instead of heading to Westeros. In that same novella, Dany's fond memories of the house with the red door took place in Tyrosh. But when Book 1 was officially released, George placed the house in Braavos. This seemingly innocuous disparity leaves readers with questions. Was the house really in Tyrosh all along, and Dany is misremembering it in Braavos? Does this explain why there was a lemon tree in Dany's memory, since Braavos' cold climate is not capable of growing citrus plants, while Tyrosh could? Or was Tyrosh simply a mistake, Was the house with the red door always in Braavos, and the lemon tree was kept in a glass garden, allowing exotic plants to thrive in harsh climates? Because George Martin changes his mind so often, and does not adhere to a strict outline, we cannot say for certain whether this was all intentional or not. The same might be true for Asshai. Did George change his mind about featuring Asshai in Dany's POV? Or was it always meant to be a mystery for the reader? His story keeps growing, and some lines of plot are getting lost in the proverbial sauce. Asshai is mentioned 18 times in Book 1, and 21 times in Book 2. But at the end of Book 5, Dany is no closer to the Shadowlands or Westeros. If anything, she's moving backwards, heading back into the Dothraki Sea with Khal Drogo. So we have two conflicting ideas. On one hand, Asshai is heavily mentioned in the first 2 books, and is also mentioned in the most recent Daenerys chapter ever published. It feels more relevant than ever. But on the other hand, nothing else about Dany's plotline in Book 5 suggests she'll be visiting Asshai. So let's look at all the hints about Asshai having relevance to Dany's story, and then reconcile those hints with the direction Daenerys seems to be heading in the future. The first mention of Asshai comes from Illyrio Mopatis, who claims that the petrified dragon eggs he gives to Daenerys came from the Shadowlands beyond Asshai. It's unclear whether Illyrio simply purchased them from Asshai, or if the eggs themselves originate there. The Asshai sell all their precious gems, gold, and artifacts in exchange for water and food, so maybe Illyrio just bought the eggs there. However, in the very next Daenerys chapter, Dany believes dragons might have come from the Shadowlands. She even wonders if dragons might still live there. Most readers subscribe to the theory that Dany's eggs came from Dreamfire, the dragon of Rhaena Targaryen. Her friend, Elissa Farman, stole 3 eggs from Dragonstone and sold them in Braavos. King Jaehaerys was worried. He said that some Pentoshi spicemonger might get his hands on 3 dragon eggs. Hundreds of years later, Illyrio is a Pentoshi cheesemonger who probably had those very same 3 dragon eggs. So Dany's eggs probably are not originally from Asshai, but rather Dragonstone. In between these 2 mentions of Asshai in Daenerys' chapters, Bran has a dream about Asshai. He lifted his eyes and saw clear across the narrow sea, to the free cities and the green Dothraki Sea, and beyond, to Vaes Dothrak under its mountain, to the fabled lands of the Jade Sea, to Asshai by the Shadow, where dragons stirred beneath the sunrise. This is Bran's first dream in the series, where the 3-eyed crow visits him and tells him to fly. He sees dragons in Asshai, and then 6 chapters later, Dany mentions that dragons might have come from Asshai. This is all in the first half of the first book. George wants us to associate Asshai with dragons. In the second book, Quaithe tells Dany one of the more cryptic and annoyingly open-ended proverbs in the entire series. To go north, you must journey south. To reach the west, you must go east. To go forward, you must go back. And to touch the light, you must pass beneath the shadow. Dany understands that Quaithe wants her to go to Asshai. There, she will find truth. Jorah also wants Dany to go to Asshai, but for different reasons. Instead of burning herself alive, Jorah says they should sell her dragon eggs in Asshai. They could buy a ship with 1 egg, or lifetime wealth with all 3. Jorah actually talks about taking Dany to Asshai 3 times in Book 1. Like Quaithe, Melisandre is introduced in Book 2, a Shadowbinder from Asshai and Red Priestess of R'hllor, who has visions of Azor Ahai in her flames. She says Stannis Baratheon is this prophesied hero reborn, but later in Book 5, High Priest Benerro says that Daenerys is Azor Ahai reborn. From smoke and salt was she born, to make the world anew. It's interesting that 2 different Red Priests have 2 different candidates for Azor Ahai reborn, and the one who's from Asshai, a location mentioned so often early in Dany's story, is the one who doesn't believe she is the promised hero. After all, the prophecy of Azor Ahai began in Asshai and spread westward by followers of R'hllor. which suggests that the faith of R'hllor might have originally been based in Asshai, before George Martin moved it to Volantis in Book 5. But more on that later. If Dany's dragon eggs were found in Asshai, and tons of people in the world believe dragons came from the Shadowlands, and Jorah repeatedly says he wants to take Dany to Asshai, and Quaithe repeatedly says Dany must pass beneath the shadow, then surely Daenerys will visit Asshai in the books. Right? Maybe that was George Martin's original plan, but now Dany's story seems to be moving west, not east. The world of Game of Thrones is really big, bigger than Earth, and perhaps bigger than Jack Vance's big planet, which itself is 3 times the size of Earth. The point is, Asshai is a long way from Meereen, perhaps longer than the distance from Westeros to Meereen. Maybe in earlier drafts of the story, Dany would fly her dragons to Asshai, like Quaithe told her to do, learn whatever piece of magic or lore she needed to learn there, and then make her way to Westeros, traveling east, through the Sunset Sea, and arriving in the Westerlands. But Dany can't do that, not anymore. George Martin has given her too much to do in Western Essos, and it seems Dany will reach Westeros by going west, not east. For example, the Tattered Prince leads a sellsword company called the Windblown. He's originally from Pentos, but fled after they made him Prince of Pentos. It sounds like an honor, but really, they killed the last prince, and he would have been at the mercy of the Magisters. In Book 5, he agrees to join Dany's cause against the slavers in exchange that she give him Pentos. It was Quentin Martell and Barristan Selmy who made this deal, but if Dany means to honor it, she'll need to stop in Pentos and somehow put the Tattered Prince in charge there. It sounds unlikely, so maybe he'll just die in the battle, and she won't have to worry about all that. But she will need to worry about Volantis. Volantis is an ancient port city, once known as the first daughter of Old Valyria, for it was here that the Valyrian Dragon Lords made their first colony. In Volantis, slaves outnumber the citizens 5-1. The wealthy Volantene nobles, who claim to have the old blood of Old Valyria in their veins, hide behind the Black Wall, built of stone fused by dragons. As scared children in exile, Dany and Viserys spent time on the streets of Volantis, surrounded by the people who thought themselves worthy of their Valyrian legacy. Well, in a sense that's true. The Valyrian freehold was built on the back of slaves. Millions of enslaved humans died brutal deaths amidst the flames and the volcanoes. Volantis likes to honor their ancestors' traditions. Daenerys is trying to eradicate slavery from the east, the very system that Volantis relies on. They sent a fleet against Daenerys in support of the Yunkai slave masters, and they're confident they will win. When he stopped in Volantis on his way to Meereen, Victorian Greyjoy heard them talking about the gold and gems and slaves that would flood into Volantis once the Dragon Queen was dead. Volantis is proud and arrogant and on the verge of revolution. High Priest Benero has been preaching about the reborn hero, Daenerys Targaryen, and how she's coming to save the world. So at first, Melisandre is the only Red Priest we meet. She's from Asshai, which George Martin may have originally intended as the center of R'hllor worship. But in Book 5, Benero is the High Priest of the Red Temple, which is in Volantis, not Asshai. In fact, there are 9 named Red Temples in the world, and none of them are in Asshai. The Widow of the Waterfront tells Tyrion that, should you reach your queen, give her a message from the slaves of Old Volantis. Tell her we are waiting. Tell her to come soon. Everything is set up perfectly for Daenerys to go to Volantis. The Red Priests and the slaves who they've been preaching to believe that she's the princess that was promised, who will come to their rescue on Dragonback. The Widow of the Waterfront says the slaves are waiting for her arrival. The Volantene nobles hide behind their black wall, protected from any approaching army. Except Harren had strong walls too, and had no answer when Aegon flew right over them and melted it with dragonflame. So it seems that George Martin has replaced Asshai's original purpose in Dany's story with Volantis. In the first 2 books, Asshai is mentioned 39 times, and Volantis only 4 times. But in Book 5, 3 point-of-view characters visit Volantis, and characters in Volantis talk about Dany's arrival. The same cannot be said for Asshai, which remains shrouded in mystery, and is untraveled to by any POV character during the books. Taking everything I've talked about in context, all the early mentions and hints about Asshai, and the rise of Volantis in the later books, what has George Martin said Asshai's role will be? Well, I've been burying the lead here. In 2008, George was asked if we'll ever see Asshai. His response? Only in flashback and memory, if at all. In 2011, George was asked again, and again he said, "You may hear about it, and you may get flashback scenes from characters who have been there, and you can puzzle it out on the internet." Which is what I'm doing right now, I guess. So no, Daenerys is not going to Asshai in future A Song of Ice and Fire books. George probably thought that she would, which is why he referenced it with so much mysticism and rumor early on. But now its role in Dany's story has probably been replaced with Volantis. The culprit of this change might be what's referred to as the Meereenese Knot. While writing A Dance with Dragons, George Martin struggled mightily with the storyline in Meereen. Slaver's Bay was about to become this major converging point of a lot of characters and plotlines. Mostly, it was the order of characters' arrival in Meereen that gave George headaches. Quentyn, Tyrion, Aegon, Victarion, Marwyn, and more, all either were or still are on their way to Daenerys. Then there was the return of Drogon, and the arrival of the Yunkai army, and the plague. There is so much going on in and around Meereen. Balancing this confluence of plot threads meant Dany was stuck. The story had grown in a way that sent a lot of characters in her direction, and she can't all of a sudden leave Meereen and go to Asshai, like her earlier chapters would suggest. But as George said, there are other ways we can learn more about Asshai in the future, so let's discuss that. In one of my favorite lines in the series, Euron Greyjoy says, "I am the godliest man to ever raise sail. From Ib to Asshai, when men see my sails, they pray." If Euron has been to Asshai, maybe that's where he obtained his dragon egg. It's a popular theory in-universe that dragons came from the Shadowlands, so maybe the egg Euron had was an Asshai dragon. He tells Victarion that he had a dragon egg, and he let a Meerish wizard try to hatch it. But then Euron threw the egg into the sea during one of his dark moods. Maybe he was lying, and Euron used the egg to pay a faceless man to murder his brother, Balon. The ghost of Highheart has a vision of a faceless man on a swinging bridge, with a crow on his shoulder. And given that the rest of her visions are about the deaths of kings, this must be a vision of a faceless man killing Balon Greyjoy. So maybe the House of Black and White in Braavos has this dragon egg from Asshai, which Euron used as payment for their services. I don't really have a way to connect this anecdote to Dany's storyline. I just think it's cool. In Book 1, Mirri Maz Duur says that when she was in Asshai, a maester from Westeros taught her about human anatomy. His name was Marwyn. And 3 books later, Sam Tarly meets a maester called Marwyn at the Citadel. So here's an example of something George planned all the way back in Book 1, and did not change by the time he got to Book 4. Marwyn the Mage is open-minded and progressive, an outcast at the Citadel. He is called the Archmaester of the Higher Mysteries. He wrote a book called the Book of Lost Books, in which he claims to have found 3 pages of Daenerys the Dreamer's visions. She was the one who foresaw the doom of Valyria, and saved House Targaryen, and Marwyn supposedly has some of her other dreams. He also has a glass candle, which are these tall spirals of obsidian. They shine magically bright, and do strange things to colors. Marwyn says that glass candles let the user see across mountains, seas, and deserts. They could enter a man's dreams and give him visions, and speak to one another half a world apart. Glass candles are Valyrian technology, rooted in blood and fire. When Sam Tarly meets Marwyn the Mage, Sam tells him about Maester Aemon's grand epiphany on his deathbed, that Daenerys Targaryen is the princess that was promised. Aemon told Sam that he must get a Maester of the Citadel to go to Daenerys, give her counsel, and see her safely back home to Westeros. So Marwyn leaves immediately to sail across the world and find Daenerys. But there's one problem. He doesn't bring his glass candle. He leaves it behind in his chamber. You'd think Marwyn would want to show Dany how a glass candle works, since it's of Valyrian ancestry just like she is, and glass candles have appeared throughout her story thus far. Maybe she could even use a glass candle to look at something in Asshai. So maybe Marwyn has another glass candle, or knows where another one is. Or maybe it doesn't matter. He could also just tell Dany about the lost dreams of Daenys, and whatever he knows of Asshai. After all, he's one of only 5 characters who have been there, and will be the 3rd to interact with Daenerys. So here we have 2 different kinds of Azor Ahai theories. The first is the type from Asshai, the prophecy spread by followers of R'hllor, like Melisandre. The second is the Targaryen prophecy, the one Rhaegar believed in. Rhaegar thought he was the prince that was promised, and then he thought it was his son, Aegon. Now, Maester Aemon believes it's Daenerys. Rhaegar knew about the Azor Ahai prophecy from Asshai. He called his son the prince that was promised, since he saw a bleeding star the night Aegon was conceived. And if he knew about Aegon the Conqueror's prophecy, about a Targaryen who must face the others, maybe Rhaegar combined these 2 prophecies into one. Maybe he thought there would come a hero, Azor Ahai reborn, and that hero must be a Targaryen. Without this prophecy from Asshai, maybe Rhaegar never realizes what Aegon's dream is saying. The prince that was promised, an ancient prophecy Melisandre says is 5,000 years old, and comes from Asshai, will be a Targaryen. Maybe this is the truth that Quaithe told Dany she would find in Asshai. So that's how Asshai can still be related to Dany's story. She knows 2 people who have been there, and a 3rd, Marwyn the Mage, is coming to meet her. If she ever has the misfortune of meeting Euron Greyjoy, maybe he will have something to tell her about Asshai and the dragon egg he found there. And of course, from Asshai comes the Azor Ahai prophecy, which High Priest Benerro and Maester Aemon believe applies to Daenerys. I've talked a lot about how Asshai could appear. At first, Dany might have gone there personally, and now we might see it with flashbacks, memories, or even glass candles. Now let's discuss why. Why is Asshai relevant to Daenerys? What lesson does it have to offer? In Melisandre's first POV chapter, she says her magic is even stronger at the Wall than it was in Asshai. When Melisandre burned Rattleshirt alive, the ruby on her neck burned so hot that she feared it would melt her own flesh. So when Melisandre is doing magic, it takes a toll on her. Magic has a cost. Daenerys learned this same lesson in Book 1 from Mirri Maz Duur. In Asshai, Mirri paid dearly to learn blood magic. She tells this to Dany, but Dany only begins to understand once she pays her own price. Rhaego's death paid for Drogo's life. Asshai itself is bleak and lonely. The food and water is poisonous, and fearsome beasts prowl the Shadowlands. Maybe the price of allowing all types of sorcery and depravity to be practiced there is that there are no children, no families or love, or any semblance of life outside of magic. Maybe it's a land without humanity. Asshai epitomizes the cost of magic in A Song of Ice and Fire, whether it's a value cost, like Euron using a dragon's egg to pay the faceless men, or a human cost, like Beric Dondarrion transferring his life force into Catelyn Stark. Dany learned this lesson once, but she may need to learn it again. If she really is the princess that was promised, Azor Ahai reborn, like the Red Priests and Maester Aemon believe, what will Dany have to sacrifice to save the world? According to legend, Azor Ahai sacrificed the love of his life, Nissa Nissa, to forge Lightbringer. Dany has no true love yet. But there is a lonely, freezing man on the other end of the world, waiting for her. A blue flower growing in a chink of ice. Maybe Dany will have to sacrifice Jon Snow, or Jon will sacrifice Dany, or neither will do either. After all, it's just a story. Let me know which part about Asshai intrigues you the most, and if you think it will still have an impact on Daenerys, even though she appears to be headed west. Thanks for watching and subscribing.